Raiders Zone Weekly with Steve Kandray, Vince Calautti, Billy Hassinger, and Jesse Meade.
This is Raiders Zone Weekly as Steve steals the mic from Vince. This is the weekly show where we present you with the best in sports and recap. And unfortunately for anyone who is interested in anything other than D3 football, this is not the week to listen to us. But you should keep listening to us because we love D3 football. Of course, this week is the first weekend of the national playoffs in Division III football. And I'm excited for it. The bracket is different than any bracket that I've ever seen since I've started paying attention to D3 football about 4.5 years ago. And I think it's exciting. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to analyze this bracket. We're going to spit out some predictions here and hopefully try not to embarrass ourselves here. But I would assume we've all done a fair amount of research here. Steve is about to lay down some statistical knowledge on everyone who's listening in tonight.
I have done an embarrassingly long amount of research here. Actually, at this moment in time, I know more and care more about Division III football than I do about any other division of football or sports for that matter. So right now I am zoned in, focused.
Ready to go.
Steve has to make up for the lack of weeks he's been here, so that's why all the stats.
So we thank you for joining us. This is Raiders Zone Weekly. I'm Jesse Meade. Billy Hassinger's here with us. You just heard Vince Calautti. Before that was Steve Kandray. And we hope you enjoy our analysis here because this D3 tournament, guys, is crazy this year. We usually are used to seeing regional brackets. We're also used to seeing no two-loss teams getting in. Now we have a handful of two-loss teams getting into this tournament. We're seeing cross-region games. Just taking a look at one of these brackets, we see that Linfield, who is from Oregon, Wesley, who is from Delaware, Mary Hardin Baylor and Trinity and McMurray and others who are from Texas are all in the same bracket. Again, the thinking here is it's a national tournament now. There's no more regional brackets, and these teams are going to have to literally travel the nation if they're going to win this tournament.
Yeah, normally you see it's the north, east, west, and south regions, but this year they just got rid of the regions, and now each region is just a bracket. You got the Mary Hardin Baylor region, the Mary Hardin Baylor bracket, Mounts bracket, UW Whitewaters, and then Delaware Valley. So this is just like 2 years ago, Jesse. I know you and I ranted on and on about how the NCAA just got rid of seeding altogether, and we talked about before we went on the air. They pretty much did that again this year, and it's just so crazy what the NCAA is doing. They can't stay consistent with the brackets.
It's a different thing every year. Last year, it was the strength of schedule. The strength of schedule is how we're going to determine this bracket. The year before, there's no seeds. We don't believe in seeds anymore. There's no seeds this year. The only seeds we know are the top four, that being Mary Hardin, Baylor, Whitewater, Mount, and Delaware Valley. Again, though, a different system, but this one perhaps may be my favorite system of all the different systems we've tried.
This is interesting. There's a lot of people on these D3 boards saying that Mount Union finally has a tough run that they have to make through, and there are a lot of people feeling that Mount Union has gotten easy in these past few playoffs. So we'll see what happens this year, considering that Mount Union, if they run the table again, will be home the entire way.
I mean, speaking as a person who has covered Mount Union football extensively for the last 3 years of my life, 4 years if you include this one, legitimately speaking, looking at all those tournaments, I think it is not contestable to say the Mount was playing in perhaps the weakest of the brackets to get to the Stag Bowl on a yearly basis. But perhaps not so much this year. Lots of good teams in Mount's brackets, and we can talk about that. The big thing that I wanted to perhaps talk about, though, for here to kind of set things off, to get us off on the right foot, is, again, the national bracket, but also, because it's a national bracket, because the NCAA chose not to be constrained by regional matchups, we finally have brackets that are filled from top to bottom. Almost every bracket, I should say, is filled top to bottom with great teams and great matchups. I mean, we're looking at potential amazing matchups that I'm sure we'll get to later. I mean, you can see teams like Wesley, Linfield, Mary Hardin, Baylor, Trinity all playing each other. Wabash, North Central, Mount Union, all in the same bracket. You have teams like Delaware Valley, St. Thomas, Johns Hopkins in the same bracket. Again, Whitewater, Franklin, Salisbury, all these teams are in the same bracket that normally you would not have been able to see because perhaps the NCAA doesn't want teams to have to worry about travel or paying the expense. But now, since it's a national tournament, we were truly getting perhaps one of the first real national Division III tournaments in football in quite some time.
Yeah, they actually forking out this year. They're just going all bets are off here this year. And normally we're used to seeing UW Whitewater coming out of the West region, which it almost doesn't make sense being only there in Wisconsin. But the lack of schools that make it into the tournament each and every year from the western side, they had to put Whitewater out there. But this year, like you said, Jesse, just switching to a complete national bracket, makes them for some great, exciting matchups this year.
The biggest issue I see is with these far western teams, such as Linfield, that's going to have to travel quite a few distances to go around and face these teams. You've also got, if Wesley wins, they may have to travel to Mary Hardin Baylor to play later on, and some other people, depending on how things shake out. Really, these western teams, though, such as Linfield and those guys, all the way out there, more than likely are going to have to be traveling, and those would be the ones I would see that could complain the most and maybe most affected by this national tournament.
But, even though they do have to travel pretty far, we're going to get some really exciting matchups out of this. I mean, there's a potential second round where we could see Linfield in the coast-to-coast matchup against Wesley. I mean, that's going to be a really exciting round, too. I mean, we got Mary Hardin Baylor perhaps playing Trinity in the second round, Wabash North Central. I mean, Wabash North Central in the second round could potentially be a really good game, too. I mean, there are so many good matchups just from the fact that it's now a national tournament and it's not just regional like we've seen in the past. So I think things, especially for Mount Union fans, I mean, we've seen in past years where the first two rounds of the playoffs sort of just feel like, well, we get some. I mean, last year we played a team that was 5-5 in the first round. But, now that it's a little bit more national, we're going to play a little bit better opponents. Even the second round now could be a little bit more of a challenge for us. And even for Whitewater, I mean, they're playing Albion, but then they're playing Thomas More. Well, they're going to play the winner of Thomas More and Franklin. Got off to a little bit of a jump there.
Look at you.
Very confident in my picks
we already
here.
know Steve's selection for that matchup.
But, I mean, it's just really exciting to see the potential matchups that we could have in the second round, and it's not going to happen later on. So I think it's very spread evenly. I don't think either one of the brackets is completely weighed down.
Some of them you could contest that teams are perhaps traveling too far. Maybe some of the automatic bids you're forcing them to travel a pretty good distance to likely get defeated in the first round. But again, if you're going to have automatic bids, obviously then you're going to have some weaker conferences spit in teams who are going to get washed out in the first round. But that's the thing, if you're going to do a national tournament, this is what happens. Very interesting stuff, though, by the selection committee. And again, while there could be some debate about certain teams that got in with the Pool C bids and other teams that didn't, from this point on, I don't think it's really our job to debate this. Now we just look at the tournament as it is. Very exciting tournament. Starting off, though, as we begin our long slog here through this bracket, let's think about the first round, guys. And again, lots of great matchups. If you have a D3 football bracket in front of you, or you know where you can find one, you can follow along with us. We'll start off. This is, of course, the D3Football.com version of the bracket to make things a little bit easier for anyone who would like to follow with us. We'll start in the top left, that being the Wisconsin Whitewater bracket. Again, lots of great first round matchups. Of course, we can only infer the seeds of the teams based on who we know is the number 1 seed. In this case, Whitewater is the number 1 seed, so we can infer that Albion is the number 8 seed, Franklin number 4, and Thomas More number 5, taking on the winner of Whitewater and Albion. Keene, again, we are inferring is number 3. Christopher Newport is number 6. They're playing each other. They will play the winner of the inferred number 2 seed, Salisbury, and number 7, Western New England. Looking at these brackets, of course, Whitewater is the overwhelming favorite to win this bracket and probably to win the left side of the bracket, that and the St. Thomas bracket, just because they're Whitewater. But looking at these first-round matchups, what's the one that really stands out to you guys right now?
The one that stands out to me is Franklin and Thomas More. Looking at this one, it's a great statistical matchup. Both teams have done a great job this year. And defensively, they're both pretty solid. Offensively, pretty good as well. So that's just one of those games that really could go either way.
I have this one listed as my favorite matchup of round 1, actually. I mean, they're both 9-1. They're both conference winners. I picked Thomas More to win it, though, because they have a little bit better of a strength of schedule, I think. According to D3Football.com's ranking of the strength of schedule, they were ranked 155 and Franklin was 210. But, I mean, they're ranked 17th and 20th on that same poll on D3Football.com. So, I think it's pretty much a toss-up, but that's definitely the one that I think is the most even matchup for round 1.
I really want to look at this Salisbury Western New England game. Western New England 10-1 coming into this tournament. They have played the most games out of any of these teams that made the tournament this year. Quite an interesting matchup you'll get to see because Salisbury's been there before. We saw them last year, I believe, in the playoffs make a pretty decent run, and so we've heard their name before in these playoffs. So I think, but I'd still say Salisbury, even though they both have the same amount of losses. Western New England has one more win due to their schedule, I believe, but I still say Salisbury, with their playoff experience, pulls this one out.
Right, and Western New England, of course, is there being in the one of the automatic bids. Again, we've seen teams get that automatic bid. I'm not sure if Western New England can pull that game off Salisbury. Of course, we'll talk about them and their option running attack, almost purely running for Salisbury. Should make for interesting stuff. Again, I think it's would be a stretch to say that any game in the first round of this bracket, anyway, any game other than Franklin and Thomas More would be the game to watch. The thing that really stands out to me, though, Franklin, you look at their one loss this year, it is the Whitewater, was not a close game. I believe the score is 45-0 if I'm not incorrect here. But this is a Franklin team that would very much desire to have a rematch with the Wisconsin Whitewater team to perhaps show that the first matchup was not indicative of how good they really are. Again, great matchup for this first round in this bracket. Let's take a second to go through this, guys, and lay out who do we have winning on this round by round, or in this first round of the Wisconsin Whitewater bracket.
For me, in the Whitewater Albion game, I got Whitewater. Obviously, they're the defending national champs. They got LaVille Coppage, who's just having a little bit of a down season compared to what he had last year, but still a pretty dominant runner. I don't think Albion will be able to stop them. I'm with Steve and Thomas More and Franklin. I think Thomas More will be able to knock them off. And then you look at Keene, Christopher Newport. Christopher Newport is my upset in this first round. I think that they'll be able to knock off Keene. And then I got Salisbury in their dominant running game with all the yards that they put up on the ground this year. I don't think Western New England will be able to stop them.
You know, Albion, the only reason they make it in is I believe they're an automatic qualifier as well, 6-4. I mean, if Baldwin Wallace can't get an 8-2, there's no way Albion's making it in at 6-4. So Whitewater, I think, steamrolls, and that's one of the two pancake teams of this tournament, to be honest. Unless they come and make some sort of surprise run like VCU does in the tournament, I don't see that happening. I'm going to actually go with Franklin over Thomas More. To be honest, I don't know much about Thomas More. I do remember Franklin is always a very has been playoff bound the past few years, and one of those teams that's very hard to defeat and have a very good playing style in the playoffs. I see them facing Whitewater in second round. Keene over Christopher Newport. Again, Keene, one of those teams that you hear about a lot. I believe they make it in. And then give me Salisbury over Western New England. Salisbury is one of those teams. You talked about the running matchup that I think all of us have felt the bitter cold that's coming down today. This is going to be starting to affect the country right now. This bitter cold suits perfectly for a running style game because those hands going to be harder for those wide receivers to make those catches in that bitter cold.
I actually have the same picks here as Billy. I've got Wisconsin Whitewater beating up on Albion. Don't really see a whole lot of a chance for Albion in that game. Thomas More over Franklin. I already gave my reasons before. A little bit better strength of schedule. Should be a great matchup though. I think it's pronounced Kane, by the way, not Keene. I'm not sure.
Kane.
Oh, Kane. Okay. Heard that somewhere. So I got Kane beating Christopher Newport. I think they're going to steamroll over them. I think they've got a pretty powerful attack there. They're ranked number 12 on the D3Football.com polls. And I'm usually pretty agreeable with those kind of polls. So I got Kane moving on. And Salisbury with their triple option running attack going to steamroll over Western New England in the first round.
I'll tell you, the funny thing about these matchups here in the first round is that they all have Wesley in common, it seems like, these teams. Looking at Kane, they beat Wesley in week 1 by 3 points. The only problem for that is that they were upset by Brockport State later in the year. I believe Brockport State only had 2 or 3 wins on the year. So that was a disappointing upset for them. Looking down further in the bracket, you also have Chris Newport, who almost upset Salisbury. They lost by 4. Salisbury, their only loss is to Wesley, 23-14. So these teams, they either have each other in common or they have Wesley in common. So
like
that makes
six degrees of Wesley.
Right. Well, Wesley's the team that's known. They are out there as an independent this year, and they are known as the team that will travel anywhere to play anyone. They're kind of the Fresno State of Division III. And again, they went quite a few places. They played quite a few playoff teams, which is great for the Wolverines. To build them up for this playoff season. Looking at the first round for me, I think it's an obvious wash, Whitewater over Albion. Franklin and Thomas More. For Franklin, I think this is a team that is going to have a chance to prove itself again against Whitewater in the second round. I think the quarterback, Johnny West, highly talented quarterback, number 7 in the nation as far as passing goes. He's only a sophomore, 316 yards a game. So great quarterback play for Franklin as well. I think that'll carry them in that game over Thomas More. Kane over Chris Newport. Again, for this game, I'm going perhaps on my gut feeling here that, if they can play with Wesley, they can pull something off. Of course, Chris Newport could also play with Salisbury. It's hard to say. But in this case, Kane coming out of the NJAC, I think they beat Cortland State, Montclair State. So this is a team that knows how to beat great teams. And so that's why I'm going to take them in the first round. And then finally, looking at the last game, Salisbury, Western New England. Salisbury, I think, is going to win that one going away. I'm excited to see what kind of stats they put up in the first round running the ball, though. Again, Salisbury, I think, can end up being a great team. The thing that stands out to me, though, about Salisbury, even though they are primarily running offense that I think is great, they are able to pass the ball and score the ball or score while throwing. Dan Griffin has thrown 13 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. So while he may not have mind-numbing yardage, when it comes down to it, they can pass the ball. So it looks like it can be an exciting first round in that Whitewater bracket. If we move on to the St. Thomas bracket, we have, again, a couple of very interesting matchups. Of course, the Delaware Valley bracket. I keep wanting to calling it the St. Thomas bracket because in my mind, St. Thomas is better than Delaware Valley. So bear with me on that. Delaware Valley bracket. They're taking on Norwich in the first round. St. Thomas is taking on St. Scholastica. Again, we can talk about it, but I think the 1-8 and the 2-7 games you can kind of throw out here. Illinois Wesleyan taking on Monmouth, and Johns Hopkins taking on St. John Fisher. Again, some great matchups here.
Yeah, there are, like you said, St. Thomas and St. Scholastica, that probably won't be much of a game, even though St. Scholastica is 10-0. St. Thomas is just the much better team there. Delaware Valley and Norwich, the way that Delaware Valley's defense has been playing this year, they're one of the top defenses in the country. And Johns Hopkins and St. John Fisher, that one is really an interesting matchup for me. You got St. John Fisher, who's had a pretty decent season, not like what we're used to seeing them, but then Johns Hopkins, who has just been obliterating everybody with the way that they run the ball and their defense as well. So that's the matchup for me to watch out of this bracket.
I think Illinois Wesleyan and Monmouth are both going to be interesting. It's going to be a great matchup. 9-1 for both teams. You look at it, both have playoff experience, so you can't have an edge on one or the other for that thing. So both these guys is going to be either one could come out of this first round right here and be taking on a very good St. Thomas team, and it's going to be interesting to see who can get the upper hand in that one.
I think it's pretty interesting to look at this bracket just for the mere fact they only have one top 10 team in it, which is St. Thomas, even though it is the Delaware Valley bracket. Delaware Valley, number 11 on the polls here. I think you look at the Battle of the Saints, St. Thomas, St. Scholastica. I mean, they are both undefeated, but St. Thomas should be moving on to that one. I think you look at you look around this bracket and you see some more pretty good matchups. Somewhere we're going to have to disagree is, though, I think St. John Fisher is going to be a big upset over John Hopkins in the first round. So
we will have disagreement over that because, and we'll get into this a little bit later. I am picking Johns Hopkins in that game, but again, I think the matchup of this bracket is Illinois Wesleyan and Monmouth. Could be great stuff there. Two really good offenses, especially Illinois Wesleyan, has beaten some really good quality opponents.
An interesting question here: why is Case Western not in this tournament? They were undefeated, if I'm correct, and they not have an automatic bid? That their group does not have an automatic bid into the tournament.
I don't believe Case was undefeated, were they?
I believe they went undefeated this year. And
well, you should have researched it if you're going to step up the bat for Case.
But I'm going to back it anyways, like I'm sure that they're undefeated, and we're going to go with St. John Fisher should not be in. Rather, the Case Western should be in, barring that they won their league, and if they're not automatic.
To be fair to St. John Fisher, their two losses are to two playoff teams. They lost to Salisbury, they lost to Hobart. So it's not like St. John Fisher dropped two unexpected games here. Looking at this bracket, though, for me, looking around, St. Thomas, I think, wins their game. Delaware Valley, I think, wins their game. I'm going to go with Monmouth over Illinois Wesleyan. And it was really, this is the game I probably stared at for the longest amount of time for the first round, because Illinois Wesleyan's beat some good teams. They lost this in North Central. That's who they lost the conference to. They were the winner-up of the CCIW. But they have beaten good playoff teams that we know of from the past. They beat Hope 35-0. They beat Wheaton 24-19. They also beat Elmhurst, who was fourth in the conference, 24-12. Again, this is a team that's beaten a lot of good opponents, but the thing that stands out for me about Monmouth, I love great passing offenses in college, and Monmouth is one of the great passing offenses. Alex Tanney, top 5 quarterback, 330 yards a game, 35 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Again, and this is also a team that can run the ball, just really a dominating offense, 132 yards a game off of their starting running back. He has 20 touchdowns as well. Again, they had a close loss to Wartburg. I think this is a great team, so I'm going to go with Monmouth in that offense. Johns Hopkins, I'm going to go with them over St. John's Fisher, and I'll talk more about Johns Hopkins later because I feel pretty good about this team, so I'm going to go with them as well.
Well, if you want to talk about power running, I mean, you got that. You say that Monmouth has a pretty good power running attack. Illinois Wesleyan is averaging 214 yards on the ground rushing, and they're only giving up 54. So I think if you take Illinois Wesleyan and Monmouth, you got to take Wesleyan every time.
Well, hey, I'm not taking Monmouth for the running attack. I'm just saying you look at this pass offense and you think they're all pass, but they can run the ball.
All right, I'm just saying.
For me, out of the St. Thomas or the Delaware Valley bracket, I got Delaware Valley and St. Thomas advancing pretty easily. I got Illinois Wesleyan for the fact of what Steve just said. You look at Illinois Wesleyan has a great rush defense, and it's the defense that steps it up and wins the games for you. We've seen that numerous times in different games, and I agree with you, Jesse. Though John Hopkins, I think that they're going to beat St. John Fisher.
Yeah, you talked about how St. John Fisher had those 2 playoff losses, but there was a lot of controversy putting them in. I say John Hopkins runs away with this matchup. St. Thomas, I think, blows away St. Scholastica. They are a very good team. We had discussions whether they solidify themselves as number 3 team earlier this year. And then you talk about Delaware Valley, again, Norwich, one of those automatic qualifying teams that wouldn't make it in if they weren't an automatic qualifying team. They're going to get killed. So then you've got your Illinois Wesleyan Monmouth. I'm going to go with Illinois Wesleyan here. I think with the run defense and everything. Again, during the cold winter months, I think running supersedes passing in these situations, particularly when it gets colder down the stretch. I'm going to take Illinois Wesleyan.
I believe we had a little confusion with whether it was Keene or Kane. I think Illinois is pronounced Illinois. Yeah, well,
just silent S gets you every time.
Yeah,
gets you every time. Mary Hardin Baylor bracket. Again, Mary Hardin Baylor's taking on Redlands. Trinity taking on McMurray. That is a game to watch. Trinity, McMurray, Linfield, and Cal Lutheran. Another great game to watch. And Wesley against Hobart. Hobart's no pushover team. Again, lots of great matchups. This is probably my favorite bracket of the 4 brackets. So let's start off here, guys. What are you thinking?
I agree with you, Jesse. This is probably one of the best bracket of the 4 this year. I think Mary Hardin Baylor, I think they beat Redlands. They're a great football team. And then Trinity McMurray, that's a great matchup right there. Looking at it, it was so close statistically, but I think Trinity is going to be able to pull off it. I think Cal Lutheran upsets Linfield. We saw that matchup a couple years ago when Linfield, I believe, beat Cal Lutheran during the regular season, and Cal Lutheran beat Linfield in the playoffs or flip-flopped. Either way, they split the season series that year. And then,
2 teams that know each other very well.
Yeah, they know each other real well. And then I think Wesley, even though Hobart isn't a pushover, the high-powered Wesley offense, I think just going to be too much to handle for Hobart's defense.
I'm going to go with the most interesting one to watch right now is going to be that Linfield-Cal Lutheran game, because Linfield, all the way out from Oregon, is going to have the most distance to travel out of any of these teams here. Even with Cal Lutheran, they would have to travel too. But I say Linfield pulls this one out. I think Linfield's got the more experience. They've gone far into the playoffs before, losing to Whitewater, I believe, last year in the quarterfinals. So these are one of these teams that they want to get back to where they were, and hopefully they can get advanced a little farther. I think they beat Cal Lutheran. Trinity, Texas, McMurray. Trinity, Texas, simply, they're 10-0, and you see in these first rounds, these teams that have the better records generally prevail. And I'm going to say Trinity, Texas goes over McMurray. Mary Hardin Baylor defeats the Redlands easily. Mary Hardin Baylor is one of those perennial teams that always makes the quarterfinals. And you've got Wesley and Hobart. Give me Wesley. Wesley, again, one of those top teams that's always dangerous. They've been trying to get vault into that number 2 spot over and over again. And I think that setback early on in the season kind of made them angry to pin their ears back and go. And that's all the teams there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good job, Vince.
You're welcome.
He doesn't. I mean, not everyone can have godlike segue abilities like Jesse, where he can just seamlessly integrate things. So
it's my job.
Sometimes you just got to wrap it up and say that's all the teams. So Mary Hardin Baylor versus Redlands. I think Mary Hardin Baylor, no doubt, moves on from that game. Trinity Texas McMurray. Trinity Texas undefeated. I'm going to take him over McMurray every time. Linfield, Cal Lutheran. Linfield was definitely one of the teams that has been a powerhouse, maybe sort of that tier 2 behind Wisconsin Whitewater and Mount Union over the past few years. So I'm going to pick Linfield to move on in that game. Wesley Hobart. I remember hearing something. I think it was on one of the D3Football.com podcasts about this. Apparently, Wesley and Hobart actually could have played each other this season. They both had open dates at the same time, and the rumor has it that Hobart declined an offer to play Wesley. I mean, you can't entirely blame him, but I think it is kind of funny to see that matchup. But I see Wesley taking that one and then setting up a potential Linfield-Wesley matchup in the second round, which could be extremely exciting. I mean, that might be one of my favorite games of the entire second round. And then that would also set up Mary Hardin Baylor versus Trinity if both my picks go, which would be kind of a battle for Texas. So we talk about this whole big national tournament, but it'd be kind of neat to see those teams play each other too.
Right. For this bracket, again, I'm going to go with Wesley and Mary Hardin Baylor advancing the 1 and 2 seeds. Not in that order, though, Mary Hardin Baylor being the 1 seed. For the Trinity McMurray game, I think this is a great game. Trinity, again, has had an interesting season. They play not perhaps the flashiest offense or defense, but the thing is they control the game. They play not to turn the ball over, and they do very well at that. McMurray, on the other hand, we know they have a high-powered pass offense. They did defeat Stephen F. Austin, or UT San Antonio, I should say, who was in their inaugural season of scholarship football. That was a big win. They lost, but Mary Hardin Baylor by 1, and then they lost to a couple of scholarship schools as well. But for that game, I'm going to go with Trinity. I felt better about picking them in that game than McMurray. Again, I love high-powered offenses, but the problem is if that offense is one-sided, I kind of get a little worried. For the other game, for the Linfield-Cal Lutheran game, I love Linfield. I want to see this team do something great. I think it would be great for D3 football to have a true West Coast power. Not that Cal Lutheran is obviously from California, but Linfield has been there historically. They were historical power prior to their arrival on the Division III scene. So I want to see Linfield succeed, and I think they can. They got a lot of great players, and I'll talk more about Linfield later. But I'll have them playing Wesley in the second round. Looking at the final bracket, that is, of course, the Mount Union bracket, the one that we are directly involved in. We'll be covering the game this Saturday between Mount Union and Benedictine. That's the 1-8 game. 2-7 game is Wabash, Illinois College, North Central, and Dubuque playing each other as well, and then Center and Hampton-Sydney are the 4-5 matchup.
And, this one looks like it could be a great bracket for Mount Union to be in. You got Wabash, who is a great football team. North Central, who we've seen recently, how Northern played them a couple years ago and was able to beat them on the road. So we know that North Central is a good quality football team. They were number 4 in the country at the time, and they're still one of those perennial powerhouses. Hampton-Sydney, I think they're a little bit overshadowed this year. But going through this one, I think Wabash and Mount Union obviously both win their games in washes. I think North Central is able to beat Dubuque, although Dubuque has had a great season, but I don't think they advanced into it.
Got a big star on that game. And stared at that one too for a while.
And then Center and Hampton-Sydney, I think Hampton-Sydney is able to pull out the win over Center and advance into the second round.
I'm going to pick Wabash over Illinois College, kind of an obvious pick there. They're probably going to roll on. North Central over Dubuque. I didn't really have a whole lot of time looking at this one. I really wasn't struggling with it too much just based on how North Central's been over the last few years. They gave Whitewater a scare last year, so I expect them to make another pretty deep playoff run. I got Center over Hampton-Sydney. Didn't know a whole lot about either of those teams, but I'm going to pick the 8-1 over the 8-2 team. And I think Center was ranked. Yeah, they were 25 as opposed to Hampton-Sydney, who was unranked on D3Football.com. And then I got Mount Union rolling over Benedictine, setting up a Wabash North Central game and a Center versus Mount Union game.
Yeah, and you got to look at Mount Union, of course. The last time Mount Union played at home was a scare against Ball and Wallace. Do not expect that to happen against Benedictine in this first round. Mount Union, Coach Karras will make sure that they're ready for this type of game. You got Wabash, Illinois College. Well, Illinois is good. With 9-1, Wabash is just better. I say Wabash advances. North Central is going to advance in this game. Word around is they are one of the more dangerous teams in this bracket to be aware of. So North Central faces Wabash, and then I have Center versus Hampton-Sydney. Hampton-Sydney, while having one loss, has more of the playoff experience, I believe, than Center does. I think Hampton-Sydney advances.
Yeah, looking at these games, I'm going to go with Wabash over Illinois College, Mount Union over Benedictine. Again, for the two other games, North Central and Dubuque, I'll tell you the Dubuque game, I was just talking to Billy before we went on air. I thought about it for a while. Wyatt Hannis has Greg McKaylee-esque numbers this year. The guy is only a sophomore passing, I believe, or he might be a junior. 322 yards a game, 3,200 yards on a season, 75% completion percentage, 42 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, efficiency rating of 97.8. I got curious because I knew that was close to McKaylee's career number. McKaylee's career number, now obviously for Hannis this isn't a career number, this is one season, but McKaylee's career number, 198.2, and he's the most efficient quarterback to ever play college football, football in general. So that amazing numbers. The thing is, Dubuque gives up a ton of points. And I think you're playing a good playoff-tested team like North Central, who has traveled and played great teams as well the last couple of seasons. I think the more experienced team will find a way to handle that type of offense.
Something else to look at just to weigh into the decision-making process on this one is Dubuque, 179 strength of schedule versus North Central, whose strength of schedule ranks as number 12. So you always got to look at that and see who they played.
Right, and so I went with North Central in that game, although I paused for a second. I thought maybe they could do this. Nah, but I would like to see the film of this game, at least to see what I want to see what Dubuque looks like in person passing the ball. For Center and Hampton-Sydney, Looking at that game, I took Center as well to set up a match with Center and Mount Union and North Central and Wabash. Now, since we've kind of gone through our first rounds and we've kind of started to take our separate ways here, I think perhaps the best way to go about talking about our second rounds is to perhaps just talk about who we have in general, talk about what you're thinking about for the different brackets, and think about how this tournament is going to shape up for then the quarterfinals as you move forward.
So we're doing the second round matchups, and then
Right. Obviously,
Okay.
since we have different matchups, talk about where the matchups are, where you see them going, and anyone else, if you disagree, feel free to chime in.
All right then. On that note, for my second round matchups in the Whitewater bracket, I got Whitewater and Thomas More, and then Christopher Newport and Salisbury. The Whitewater Thomas More game I think will be a pretty interesting one. I think that Whitewater is able to beat Thomas More, although I don't think it'll be as easy in contest as it was against Albion. I think Thomas More will put up a little bit more of a fight, and then Christopher Newport and Salisbury. You can't go against the ground game of Salisbury. They just are good. Although Christopher Newport does squeak by in the first round, I just think that their defense isn't going to be able to stop the ground game that Salisbury has. So Salisbury's literally going to run their way into the quarterfinals.
You know, I was thinking kind of similar with that Thomas More Whitewater matchup potentially, because you and I had the same pick there. I think Thomas More, if they play Whitewater, they could stick around till at least the second half, and then I don't think they'll be able to hang with them there because I think Whitewater is going to be able to, just move the ball down the field, rush on them a little bit. But I could see Thomas More hanging in with Whitewater a little bit, and then instead of Christopher Newport, I've got Kane advancing to play Salisbury. So that's how my bracket's shaped up.
The interesting thing right here is Whitewater in my bracket faces Franklin. Franklin wants to avenge what happened from the beginning. It's not going to happen. Remember last year when Whitewater had to travel, that wasn't until the quarterfinals. So
Right.
They're still playing at home here. They're going to play home throughout the entire playoffs until they reach the Stag Bowl. So you're going to be facing a Franklin team at your house. Whitewater always does much better at their own place. Even though being down, I still see them advancing. I've got Kane and Salisbury. I've got Salisbury advancing again. Salisbury, just one of those teams that knows how to win in the playoffs. And I think they just get past them, and they're going to quarterfinal matchup of Whitewater and Salisbury. And every time random side note, every time I think of the word Salisbury, I think of steak. So I think steak promotes victory. A lot of people pregame steak.
That is
big
solid
matchup.
reasoning that I can agree with. Take that to the bank.
Yeah.
Cash that check.
I would not be against Salisbury changing their mascot from the Seagulls to the Steaks.
The steaks.
I would not
You know-
be-
Steaks. Yeah.
Every time I think of the school Salisbury, I think of steaks too. But
I'm glad we're going off on this tangent. I think this is a wise area to pursue. Huge ground game for the Salisbury Steaks.
Forget the bracket. Let's just talk about mascots.
Unfortunately, in my bracket, I have UW and Franklin. And for Franklin, despite the fact that they're a 4 seed, I think this is a team that if you put them in the right position, they can win quite a few games. Very solid team. Again, like I mentioned, their only loss is the Whitewater, and though it was not a close game, that says something in and of itself. I don't think they're going to be able to avenge themselves, though, against Whitewater. Again, Warhawks have just too much talent to be stopped by Franklin. Kane and Salisbury, again, this is a game I stopped and I looked at for quite a bit. It's hard to say. Salisbury had a chance to beat Wesley, but couldn't do it. Kane, on the other hand, did beat Wesley. So by theory, Kane should beat Salisbury, but I just can't do it. I can't do it. And Salisbury, that ball control offense, I think they win this game.
It's that theory that we subscribe to that Steve sent us online, how Mount
Right.
Union 2010 was greater than Auburn football.
Side note,
What an interesting
while
thing.
we're getting off on tangents, side note, there is a great website that Steve discovered, sent us all to us. It's called myteamisbetterthanyourteam.com. You can use the transitive property to prove that any football team at any division is better than any other football team in any division. In this case, we use it to prove that Wilmington, who is a 0-10 OAC team for the last couple years, is better than the 2010 Auburn Tigers.
I actually found it perusing the boards on d3football.com, so it's kind of weird that all of our info comes from them, apparently.
Right. Well,
anything cool at all.
Not too many outlets that cover D3 football, to be fair. The thing that we found was that the distance as far as steps that it took to prove that they were better between Wilmington and Mount Union is the same number of steps to prove that Mount Union is better than Auburn. For whatever that's
it
worth.
also shows how illogical the
Transitive
property of
is for-
transitive can be.
Right. Good stuff. Anyway, let's move on to the other bracket before we just completely lose control of the show. St. Thomas are the Delaware Valley bracket.
I know.
Delaware Valley bracket.
Catches us every time.
Aggies, not Tommies. The Delaware Valley bracket. Quarterfinal matchup or the second round matchups. What do you guys have?
For me, I got St. Thomas and Illinois Wesleyan, and then Johns Hopkins against Delaware Valley. I think St. Thomas is able to take care of business against Illinois Wesleyan. And, we talked about number of weeks ago on the show how St. Thomas has really emerged as a pretty good powerhouse from the MEAC ever since their current head coach took over. So I think St. Thomas advances to the quarterfinals, and Johns Hopkins and Delaware Valley. It's a pretty good, interesting matchup because Johns Hopkins has a pretty decent offense and Delaware Valley has an outstanding defense. I think that the defense is able to shut down Johns Hopkins' offense, and I got St. Thomas and Delaware Valley in the quarterfinals.
I've got St. Thomas and Illinois Wesleyan. I think it's the same thing that Billy had. I've got St. Thomas moving on in that one. They've been a powerhouse in recent years, and
right.
Putting everything aside, they really could make a case to be the number one seed in this bracket. Ranked number 3 on the D3Football.com polls. Looking great. They looked really good last year too against a couple of teams. Then I got St. John Fisher beating Johns Hopkins. I got Delaware Valley moving on, and then I have Delaware Valley beating St. John Fisher because I think they're number one seed for a reason. I think they could advance and play St. Thomas in the quarterfinals.
When you look at these brackets, I know there's no actual seeding, but we kind of put seeding into our mind. And where they place these guys, generally speaking, they are correct in that. So you don't see too many upsets in Division III when it comes to Division III football. Last year, we only saw a few. We saw St. Thomas get upset in the quarterfinals last year, and we saw a few others. Mostly all 1 and 2 seeds made those quarterfinals and semis.
Much to our celebration, because we would have had to travel to Minneapolis, but that's another story.
Much to Cecil's celebration as well. Cecil did not want to fly.
Right.
So I'm going to have to go with St. Thomas over Illinois Wesleyan and Delaware Valley over Johns Hopkins. Simple fact if they are, quote-unquote, seeded higher than these guys. And D3 football, the people's selections usually do very well in selecting who should be the top seeds and who shouldn't.
Right. I had Monmouth as opposed to you guys with Illinois Wesleyan against St. Thomas, but that's where the difference ends because St. Thomas, I believe, will come out on top of that game. St. Thomas is a great team, and I think that they have a chance to prove that this year. They were able to escape the shadow of Wisconsin Whitewater and perhaps have a bracket for themselves here with Delaware Valley. For Johns Hopkins and Delaware Valley, this is the one game where I was feeling kind of frisky. So I went with Johns Hopkins over the Aggies. And, based on...
You're aware this isn't lacrosse, right?
Right.
Right. John Hopkins is good in lacrosse, but
they're very good in football, too. The thing that stood out to me, for Delaware Valley and Johns Hopkins, these are two great defenses. Delaware Valley has an outstanding defense. The offense is a little bit underwhelming for me anyway, and I think part of that may be what we saw last year from Delaware Valley when they came here and played Mount Union. It wasn't too crazy of a close matchup. But I think Johns Hopkins, the defense combined with their offense, this is the Johns Hopkins team that has 33 sacks, 10 interceptions, 9 fumble recoveries, and they've only allowed about 1,000 yards rushing, 1,300 yards passing. So they, maybe perhaps they haven't played as great a competition, but I think they've played some pretty good teams, decent teams, I should say. So I'm going to go Johns Hopkins getting the upset over Delaware Valley to move on.
That's a major upset right there, man. That's huge.
Hey, I got to go with something here, right? Mary Hart and Baylor bracket, what is it looking like for you guys in that second round?
For me in the second round, I got Mary Hart and Baylor and Trinity, and then Cal Lutheran against Wesley. I think Mary Hart and Baylor, they're just going to be too much for Trinity to hold. We talk about each and every year the Purple Powers. We had a trivia question earlier this year where the top 5 teams, I believe it was a Purple Power, and then finally...
Who was the first team that was not that did not wear purple that was in the top 5?
I think it was Bethel or something that was at 6 or something.
At the time, yes.
But nonetheless, so I got Mary Hart and Baylor defeating Trinity and going on to the quarterfinals, and then Cal Lutheran traveling all the way across country to take on Wesley. Again, that offense for Wesley, we saw it a couple years ago. They are a very scary offense. They can play with anyone in the country, and their defense isn't too shabby either. I think they knock off Cal Lutheran.
All right, I have Mary Hart and Baylor and Trinity, Texas as well. Mary Hart and Baylor wins that one. They're just too good. Here's where I have Linfield versus Wesley coming in. I have Linfield winning this game. Simple fact. Here we go. It's a long distance travel for Linfield. People are going to be counting them out because when they have to travel far distances, we've seen in the past that they traditionally struggle. They're going to come in. They're going to be angry. They're going to get pumped up right now that no one is predicting the win against a very good Wesley team. They're going to come in and upset them. Linfield advances into the quarterfinals over a very good Wesley team. Going to be a close matchup, though. I think they shell-shock the Wolverines.
But, the other thing is, though, traveling across country from West Coast to East Coast, that really messes up your body clock.
Huge difference.
Because we saw it a couple weeks ago when Phillip Rivers and the Chargers were on the East Coast. He had to set his clock for 4 a.m. Pacific time. 7 a.m. here.
While we're
L-
applying
wait,
the transitive property.
Little,
Yeah, so-
little do you
By
know.
the transitive property of
Little,
the NFL
little
to
do you
Division
know
III.
that Coach Jim Harbaugh will be traveling with his Linfield team to help them out, and the San Francisco 49er Magic will rub off on this Linfield team.
Did
I'm
I
being
mention
totally
did
sarcastic.
I mention we were getting off on tangents tonight?
But the interesting thing here, though, is I understand that's a long distance travel, but Linfield again, they're going to have to use that motivation of no one believes in us to get through this matchup.
I'm gonna hop in here because I'm gonna defend Vince because I have exactly the same thing happening. I have Linfield upsetting Wesley.
I'm not
here.
saying that it can't
I'm not.
happen.
No, whoa, buddy.
Whoa.
I'm saying I have the same thing happening here. Linfield, I think, is a great team, and I have them going on a little bit of a magical run here that I'll get to explain later. I have Mary Hardin Baylor and Trinity. Again, the Crew, I think, they're the more seasoned opponent, or more seasoned team here, the more experienced team. I'll go with the Crew to take on Linfield in the quarterfinals.
Well, I thought I was going to get to talk this segment, but you guys look like you're having so much fun, so I just kind of stayed out of it.
I mean, we can just give you the entire Mount Union bracket.
You know what? Let's just get back on. Let's get back on to what we're actually talking about here. Division III football. Speaking of purple powers, our bookstore only sells purple highlighters.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that today.
Yeah, weird.
Right.
It's true. Okay. Anyway, Mary Hardin Baylor over Trinity. Obviously, they've been one of the top teams in the country this year. I don't see Trinity really standing a chance. Should be a good matchup though. And then I have Linfield versus Wesley, the coast to coast matchup. I have Wesley beating Linfield. I'm gonna kind of take it the opposite way because you said they're gonna be upset from having to travel. I'm gonna kind of use your own logic, Vince, and say that it's gonna be hard for them to travel all the way across the country. So I think they're gonna beat. Or they're going to lose to Wesley because of the travel, and it's going to be difficult.
Right.
And I just think Wesley's a better team this year. So that leaves me with Mary Hardin Baylor and Wesley in the quarterfinals.
I think we're looking at the Mount Union bracket now. Two very good matchups, especially this Wabash North Central matchup that I think we all ended up picking because none of us wanted to pull the trigger on Dubuque. So Wabash with one of the best defenses in all of Division III taking on North Central in that second round game.
Yeah, I think that Wabash is going to be able to knock off North Central just because of the defense. You know, sometimes they say the best offense is a great defense, and just for the fact that, like you said, Jesse, they got one of the top defenses in Division III football, I think they were able to knock off North Central. And then in my other second-round matchup in this bracket, Hampton-Sydney versus Mount Union, I don't think Hampton-Sydney really would stand a chance. The defense for Mount Union, like we've seen week in and week out, has just been playing so great at football, allowing just a little bit over 200 yards a game on defense. It just really says a lot about the way that Mount Union plays defense, and Hampton-Sydney's offense won't be able to move the ball.
Yeah, I'm with you on there. I got Wabash and Mount Union both advancing. Wabash and North Central, though, will probably be one of the best games. I'm going to go ahead and say it right now, one of the best games of this tournament right here, because both teams, Wabash 10-0, North Central 9-1, both very good teams, both dominant powerhouses. You talked about Wabash's defense, Wabash playing at home as well. Going to be a great matchup, I think, but I think Wabash wins it.
If the seeding holds true, then this would technically be an upset, but I'm going to pick North Central over Wabash. I think just judging on historically how they've been, how they were last year, I think they're a little bit better of a team. Definitely going to be a great matchup. I'm going to have to agree with Vince on this one. Maybe one of the best games of the tournament. I have Center advancing over Hampton-Sydney and playing Mount Union, and Mount Union should be able to put them away pretty quick. Defense wins championships, so we'll see if that holds true for Mount, having the number one defense coming in. So I got North Central versus UMU in the quarterfinals.
I also have Mount Union Center. I think Mount Union is going to be able to win that game. Again, defense for Mount Union has been amazing this entire year. That defense has been stellar. I think when I think about it, besides the Capital game, I can only think of one sustained drive that a team has had against Mount Union this year, and that, again, was the Baldwin-Wallace game where we saw the backup quarterback come into the game running that option attack. Again, I won't call it gimmicky because it's not a gimmick, but something that was very different, not even a traditional offense. So I'll go with Mount Union over Center. Wabash North Central, I love Wabash. The defense is amazing. One of the best in all of Division III. They only allow 64 rush yards a game, and they give up a little bit more, 180 pass yards, but a ton of 27 sacks, I believe 14 interceptions, 14 fumble recoveries. Great defense. Defense wins championships. I'm going to go with Wabash as well, setting up a Wabash-Mount Union quarterfinal game. Now we're down to the Final Four game, guys. You can kind of wax poetic however you would like here. Talk about the quarterfinal games that you think are going to be the best, or the games that you think are going to be the most exciting, because I think everyone's bracket is kind of a little bit different at this point. But I'll start things off this time just to spice things up. For my quarterfinals, I have Whitewater and Salisbury, St. Thomas, Johns Hopkins, Mary Hardin Baylor, and Linfield, and Wabash and Mount Union. Starting off with the game that is of most interest to us, that being the Mount Union game, if this game happens, I will be the happiest sports broadcast announcer in all of Division III because that will be a great game to call. Two of the best defenses in all of Division III taking on each other. I want Mount Union to win. I'm not picking Wabash to win this game, but I would not be dissatisfied if we had another 6-3 defensive slugfest like we saw a couple weeks ago in the NFL.
Wouldn't it be more exciting to call
Or
a game
NCAA.
Wouldn't it be
Division
more
I.
exciting to call a game with a lot of scores? Wouldn't you want to see like the two top offenses play each other?
No. Defense is where it's at, man.
Because you're just calling another 3 and out for Mount Union punts against, you're not calling big run.
It's not that, though. It's the fact that with high-scoring games, with all the time, not that it's really a lot of time between the one drive to another, it just takes a while.
Right. Again, so I Mount Union, I'm going to pick over Wabash because I think Mount Union has the better offense, although that could be debatable statistically. I don't think it is, though. Steve does have the statistics, though, that I'm sure he'll lay on us here in a minute. For Mary Hardin-Baylor and Linfield, again, I said I was going to take Linfield on a magical run here. I'm going to keep them on the magical run. Not only have they now stayed at home and won, traveled to Delaware and won, I'm going to say they're going to win in Texas as well. Mary Hardin-Baylor turns the ball over, which is something that I think Linfield, if they can survive the travel, can take advantage of. Whitewater and Salisbury, again, interesting matchup, but I think being a one-dimensional team may be not a good thing against the defense that's as good as Whitewater. If they can force you into doing things you don't want to do, I think that plays into their hands. I'm going to go with Whitewater as well. St. Thomas against my other magical run team, Johns Hopkins. This is where I think the run comes to an end for Johns Hopkins as well. I'll go with St. Thomas. I think just too good to overcome a Johns Hopkins team that I think has a lot of upside.
Those are all pretty good picks for you, Jesse. My picks in the quarterfinals, I got Mount Union and Wabash. Like you said, Jesse, this will be a great matchup to see in the quarterfinals. I think Mount Union does pull it off, though. I think the defense is just a little bit better, and they'll be able to shut down Wabash's offense more. And then in the quarterfinals in Mary Hardin-Baylor's bracket, I got Mary Hardin-Baylor and Wesley. And like you said, Mary Hardin-Baylor does turn the ball over, and I think that's why Wesley is actually going to advance to the semifinals and take on Mount Union for the second time in 3 years. As we saw a couple years ago, they came in, knocked out our quarterback, Kurt Rocco.
Crazy matchup.
Which we were about ready to have heart attacks up in the booth.
Right.
But the defense for Wesley really improved this year. UW Whitewater and Salisbury, like you said, Salisbury, one-dimensional. They have a great ground attack, but Whitewater's defense just a little bit too good. They'd be able to shut them down enough and get the ball back into Lavelle Coppage's hands to allow him to run wild on Salisbury defense. St. Thomas and Delaware Valley, my last quarterfinal matchup. I think Delaware Valley, with their defense, is able to knock off the Tommies and advance to the semifinals.
I'm going to go with I think Mary Hardin-Baylor advances this. I think they're just too good. Linfield, that magical run, they travel cross-country. They're just too drained emotionally after that victory and too drained from travel-wise. I understand it's a little farther back. This works against them because they're a lot farther, got some more nicks and bruises. Mary Hardin-Baylor advances. I don't think the game is as close as you guys say for Mount Union Wabash. Teams come to Mount Union Stadium, except for Ball and Walls this year, and die. And that includes both defense and offense. Once Mount Union starts scoring, they roll, and I think Mount Union wins that. St. Thomas, I think, overcomes Delaware Valley, pulls out the victory. I think St. Thomas feels slighted. They did not get the number 1 seed. I think they're a much better team than people are giving them. I think St. Thomas wins. Whitewater rolls Salisbury. They're at home this year. While they've had their struggles this year against good teams, I'm going to go with Whitewater.
All right, so I'm going to kind of gloss over a couple of these picks because I have a lot to say about one of these picks. But first one, North Central versus Mount Union. I think North Central is going to come in, play a pretty good game against Mount, but I think Mount's going to be able to contain them with their defense, put up some points, win that one. Mary Hardin-Baylor over Wesley. I think Mary Hardin-Baylor is just a better team. Delaware Valley over St. Thomas is how mine worked out. I think they're going to win just because they're seated higher, and they are, I think, despite your doubts, I think they are the better team. Now where it gets interesting. I have University of Wisconsin Whitewater. University of Wisconsin Whitewater versus Salisbury. I have Salisbury winning this one. I have not been very impressed with Whitewater this year. I really don't think they even deserve to be the number 1 team in the country right now.
I think, look, a Mount Union fan that doesn't think Whitewater
I know,
should
right?
be number 1. Oh.
I know. You could say,
I'll let you defend yourself.
Oh, Steve, you're biased. Oh, you go to Mount Union. Of course you would say that. You know what? Objectively, the Ohio Athletic Conference is better than the WEAC this year, personally. And Wisconsin Whitewater has
Objectively, personally.
That makes no sense.
No.
In my personal objective reasoning.
Objectively, the Ohio Athletic Conference is better, but personally, I also feel
follow you.
that we are a lot better. Hang on a second.
No, he does. He did run this in SPSS. He can prove this statistically.
No, that's coming at the very end.
Okay,
this is before that.
We'll leave that for the grand finale crescendo.
All right, Wisconsin Whitewater nearly beat by Oshkosh, gave up 7.9 yards rushing in the first half against the Warhawks. You got Salisbury coming in with one of the best rushing attacks in the country, running that triple option that no one's able to prepare for very well. So I think that's going to be one factor. Also, they let Eau Claire throw for 330 yards against them. Eau Claire's 5-5. They're a mediocre WEAC team, and they only won by 15. And really, they end the season by beating La Crosse 17-3. Really, I mean, you can only go so far with margin of victory. But come on, and then Stevens Point hung with them till the second half, and they're 4-6. I mean, they're beating, not overwhelmingly beating these teams in the WEAC that are okay, but they're not destroying teams where they should be.
The counterpoint to that being Mount Union beat Muskingum by 28. They barely beat Baldwin Wallace, who's a good team, probably better than a lot of the teams that are in the playoffs. But and they barely beat Capital as well. Just to put that out there.
28-7, right?
But I'm saying struggle against Capital.
The biggest factor that you're going to have here is that Wisconsin Whitewater is a team that knows how to play in the playoffs. That defense has stepped up. Last year, you saw their starting quarterback go down, and they rolled most of the way through that conference. They had trouble at the very beginning. Once he got settled down, they ended up winning the championship. So I think the defense, again, steps up, and I think that's why they overcome Salisbury. I think they're playing at home this time, which helps them out.
They are playing at home, but I also see Salisbury coming in and keeping Lavelle Coppage off the field. I mean, that's one thing that Wisconsin Whitewater's been able to do.
Really the key to beating Whitewater.
Whitewater's been able to do a good job of wearing down teams, but if they come in against Salisbury and Salisbury is able to move the ball on them, they're going to keep Coppage off the field. They're going to be able to use Wisconsin Whitewater's tactic against them and wear them down. So I think it's going to be kind of a wake-up call for Wisconsin Whitewater, who's used to playing these okay WEAC teams this year, because they're going to go up against a very tough Salisbury team. And I think they might catch them off guard and upset them.
Calling out the WEAC.
I am.
Steve Kandray.
I am.
Well, he stands by his
I am
decision.
not from the USA Today.
There is something to be said for a man that will stand by his convictions, for whatever it's worth. So we've now been left with our semifinals matchups, and we got 9 minutes, guys. So let's talk about this. Linfield and Mount Union for me. Whitewater and St. Thomas. If this were the true semifinals, that would be an amazing D3 semifinal. I think, unfortunately, if this is the case for Linfield, not only have they won a game in Delaware, they won a game in Texas, now they got to win a game in Ohio against at a team that hasn't lost a game in Ohio since 2005. So tough call, tough road for Linfield. I think they can make it a very great game. Can Linfield, mainly because they have a great defense as well as does Mount Union, but I think it's just too much to keep that kind of effort up for 3 sustained weeks in a row. So I'll go with the Purple Raiders. You'll notice the theme to my bracket is my general consensus on D3 is until it has been proven otherwise to me, I can't pick against Mount Union and Whitewater. And that's why I'm picking Whitewater over St. Thomas as well. They are the complete package. The Warhawks are the complete package. They have everything. Lavelle Coppage can hit a home run at any play. We saw it last year. Mount Union had a great defense last year, and how many times did we see Lavelle Coppage just get 7-8 yards a carry and then break off a 60-yard run? The guy can do it at any time. He's perhaps the greatest running back we've seen since Nate Kamick come through Division III. Huge talent. I think it's too much to go against Whitewater, against St. Thomas as well. So I'll go with the Warhawks and Mount Union again in the national title. And it may seem bad for Division III, but again, until someone can prove that they can beat either one of these teams in the playoffs, I can't pick against them.
Yeah, it's very difficult to pick against either. For me, in the semifinals, I got Wesley and Mount Union to get a rematch of 2 years ago. I think Mount Union has a little bit easier time this time around. I don't think that we lose our starting quarterback to a concussion by ducking down and taking a shot to the head.
That was pretty crazy.
But I think Mount Union has a little bit easier time against Wesley. I don't think that Wesley would be able to compete with them this year. On the other side, I got UW Whitewater and Delaware Valley. I think Delaware Valley is able to knock off Whitewater this year.
Oh, look, another Mount Union fan picking Whitewater to lose. Continue. Don't let me stop you.
I really don't like you, Jesse. But nonetheless, though, I think the reason I'm picking Delaware Valley is just because you look at their defense. I think that they're able to shut down Lavelle Coppage enough. I think their offense is able to stay on the field just long enough to wear down the Whitewater defense, because we've seen it before. No matter how good your defense is, if you're on the field for a little while, you do get tired and you do give up some points, and I think that's what happens here.
I'm looking at I have Mount Union, Mary Hardin, Baylor for this matchup. Mount Union, I think, wins this one simply because they're at home. I think they would struggle very mightily against a Mary Hardin Baylor team if they had to play in Texas. We've seen them. I think the only time we've really looked good on the road is against our last game of the season against Muskingum, and we would have looked a lot better had it actually been kind of dry up in Ohio Northern. But with that being said, really I think Mount Union pulls out this victory for the simple fact of being home. Wisconsin Whitewater, St. Thomas, a great matchup. Wisconsin Whitewater, you can't ever count them out because of how they play. That being said, gut feeling says St. Thomas comes in and pulls an upset.
Wow, am I really the only person with
Whitewater?
Whitewater in the finals?
The reason
Wow.
in the gut feeling, the reason is this: Whitewater's been so good for so long. They are bound for some sort of upset to happen.
I mean,
They've had so many close calls this year. Somebody needs to knock them off at some point. And I don't think it's going to be Mount Union this year. I think St. Thomas comes in, pulls an upset, because I think I just have this gut feeling it's going to happen.
I understand you having a gut feeling, but couldn't that logic be applied to Mount Union? They've been so good for so long, someone is bound to upset
We've
them.
lost the championship game.
That's why I was thinking too, Jesse. It's like someone
Obviously,
other than Whitewater can step
We've
up.
we've lost a championship game 2 years in a row now, so we've
Right.
already lost. Whitewater hasn't lost.
This is true.
It's time for them to lose, and this feeling that's inside me says they're going to lose. Of course, that comes with an asterisk of being said. I won't be surprised if they win.
Oh, so you just tossed that entire analysis.
No, I'm not
Just
tossing the
kidding.
entire analysis out, but there's
All right,
that asterisk there.
Here's Steve. You got about 4.5 minutes before we have to wrap it up, so lay it on us.
So I've got Salisbury and Delaware Valley, the one semifinal matchup. And as much as I talked about how good Salisbury was, I think Delaware Valley is going to beat them.
There it is.
So Delaware Valley,
So the team that beats Whitewater doesn't get in.
the team that beats Whitewater does not get in. They get beat by Delaware Valley because they'll be so excited from beating Whitewater that they'll kind of let their guard down. Then I've got Mary Hardin Baylor versus Mount Union. I think Mary Hardin Baylor, kind of coming back into prominence where they were a few years ago. But I have Mount Union winning that game, playing Delaware Valley in the championship, and UMU win it all.
There it is. UMU winning it all. Steve Kandray
What a
gets the shot.
surprise.
Actually, I think we're all going to be shocked at who we picked here to win it all. But to talk about that semifinal matchup, I should bring up a somewhat famous historical event here on Mount Union's campus. I believe it was 4 years. Was it 4 years? Yeah, I believe it was 4 years ago, perhaps the year before that. Then resident sports director Josh Dunn had a matchup between Mount Union and Mary Hardin Baylor, and famously picked the Purple Raiders to lose on Mount Union's campus. Perhaps an interesting selection by the sports director. Got quite a bit of heat. Not real heat, but heat nonetheless from the football team.
Say that was the year before we got here,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah. He picked Mary Hardin Baylor to win that game, and of course Mount Union won that game. Yeah, it was the year before we came into business here. Again, I almost feel like I can almost feel like a balloon being deflated, kind of feeling like we're picking Mount Union, but it's not for lack of good cause. To me, defense wins championships. I'm hard pressed to see a defense better in the nation than Mount Union. Though our offense has struggled at times this year, though the passing game has struggled, and recently the running game has been slow to get off a couple times. Every single time that the offense for Mount Union has struggled, the defense has either completely shut the other team down or saved the day for Mount Union, and I don't think that changes in the playoffs.
I just want to get this in because I have my chart here.
Yeah, read off this chart.
Well, if it was a video podcast, it'd be a lot better because I actually did some sort of a plot of different teams here. If you imagine a chart where total defense is on one side and then total offense would be the other axis, I have Mount Union in the very lower left-hand corner.
Which is the best. Yeah,
which is the best, and then upper right-hand corner would be the worst. Mount Union has the best, well, this is yardage only, yardage only. They have the best total yardage, and they have the best total, keeping teams the least amount of yardage and gaining the most yardage out of any team left in the playoff field. And the number 2 team is actually not even Wisconsin Whitewater. It's who's number 6 in the top 25?
Number 6 in the top 25. Let me pull out my bracket and peruse down this numbers.
North Central.
There you go, North Central.
So I have North Central as the second best statistical team. And then I have Whitewater right up there with Salisbury, which is even more why I think Salisbury can beat them. So, I mean, looking at this just statistically, we talk about how much our offense has struggled, but we're still around number 7 for total offense and around we are number 1 for total defense. So, I mean, statistically, looking at this, I think there is good cause to say that we're going to win the Stag Bowl again.
The hardest part about picking against Mount Union is the simple fact that we're Mount Union students. And you have that connection, and you're like, I don't want to pick against because then you feel terrible.
Well,
with that being said, though, I think Mount Union wins against St. Thomas for the simple fact St. Thomas just gets too excited, and this is too much of a big moment for them to grasp. I think Mount Union pulls it out, and I think their defense just too much. Too much experience, too much defense.
To me, that might have been a very real feeling if Mount Union had dropped that game against Baldwin Wallace. Then you got to think maybe there is legitimate reason to pick against them. Maybe the defense isn't as good as we think it is, but the defense, again, shut down Baldwin Wallace for that entire game minus the one drive by Deziak at quarterback.
Well, if they wouldn't have returned that one kickoff for a touchdown, it wouldn't even been as close
that was
to the game
spark,
as it was.
Right. So it'll be interesting. I guess, like I said, we got out of the way. Wah for Mount Union sports journalists to pick Mount Union, but I think it's going to be a great tournament, nonetheless. A lot of great matchups have the potential here. It seems like no matter really who wins in round one, we get set up with awesome matches in round two, and it's only going to get better from there. I love the fact that it's a national tournament, and I hope that it plays out in the best way possible. That'll do it for us for our Raider Zone Weekly. We thank you for joining us. We'll be back to the normal format of every type of sports that you could ever want next week, the week after. We won't be here next week. It's Thanksgiving break, and hey, we want to go home and celebrate Thanksgiving, so we hope you'll allow us.
We want turkey.
Right, I hope you'll allow us the courtesy. We will then be back the week after Raiders Zone Weekly, back to the normal format. Don't forget, the Genie Knows pregame show this week is scheduled for 11:15, as all playoff games kickoffs are at noon. So join us at 11:15 for the pregame between Mount Union and Benedictine, and we will have kickoff at noon here on the radio voice of Mount Union, WRMU. Until then, keep listening to the radio voice of Mount Union, WRMU 91.1.